Hello, this is Bob Carroll, and it's March 3rd, 2026. You're in Cassius, North Carolina. You'll find out later why it's not Cashiers. Happy birthday, America, 250 years. And it's also happy birthday to Cassius, because in a sense, 200 years ago, the first white settler came here in 1826. This is an unincorporated town in western North Carolina, about 8 miles from a rock in the Chattooga River called Ellicott Rock. This is the point and land where North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia come together. We have a year-round population of about 5,000, and it swells to about 30,000 in the summer when it's a lot warmer weather than it is right now. This is a documentary about how this place was founded, and we're using artificial intelligence. So what you'll see is some pictures, some of the early settlers in this town using AI, and we're gonna have them talk about what it was like down here. But more than that, there were 4 major historical trends that swept across the country during that time period. You're gonna get a little bit of a history lesson on this, because there's slavery, there's the Civil War, there's the Trail of Tears where we kicked the Cherokees out of their land, and there's Reconstruction. So in addition to finding out what this place was like when people first founded it, you really get a sense of some major trends cutting across the history of our country during that time period. Because the first inhabitants of this place were the Cherokee, we're going to start with a Cherokee chief by the name of Ostanaqua. And actually the title he had in his nation years ago, the highest title was Warrior Chief. So please welcome Warrior Chief Ostanaqua.
Greetings, my friends. I am Ostanaqua, War Chief and beloved man of the Cherokee people. I came into this world near the year 1710 in the mother town of Tellico, along the waters you now call the Little Tennessee. In my time, these mountains and valleys, near where you now stand in Cashiers, and all the land for many days' walk, belonged to the Ani-Yunwia, the real people. The Creator placed us in these ancient hills from the beginning. We have always been part of this land, and this land part of us. For generations, we lived in towns along clear streams, planting maize, beans, and squash, hunting the forests, and keeping balance with all living things. When white people came across the Great Water, we met them with both open hands and raised weapons. We traded deerskins and furs for iron tools, guns, and horses, yet fought many battles to protect the ground where our ancestors rest. Sickness, especially smallpox, took whole towns, warriors falling to enemies we could not see. When I was young, our people lived in more than 70 towns, each with its own council fire and leaders, sharing one tongue and blood, yet walking separate paths. During the French and Indian War, the chieftains met in a village called Echota, near what you now call Calhoun, Georgia. There in 1758, we formed the Cherokee Indian Confederation to gain power and negotiate more effectively. This became the capital of the Cherokee Nation. In 1762, I journeyed across the saltwater with 2 other Cherokee headmen to speak to King George III. We asked that our boundaries be honored. The king issued his proclamation in 1763, drawing a line along these mountain crests, what you call the Continental Divide, no white settlement beyond it. That line lay close to where your Cashiers stands today. Yet distant words on paper fade. Settlers grew restless. Hunger for our lands and arguments with Great Britain fed their anger. Your revolution followed in 1776. The king's promise could not hold back the tide. The line meant nothing. I walked this earth until the 1780s, watching much taken. Yet the spirit of the Cherokee endures, like eternal rivers carving stone. Now I pass the telling of our story to to Principal Chief John Ross, who carried our voice through darker days. May the Creator keep you in balance.
Thank you, Chief Ustanakwa. My name is John Ross. I was born in 1790 of Scottish ancestry in what is now Alabama. My grandmother was Cherokee, which, because of the matrilineal system, made me a Cherokee. I was called Giwiskui, or Mysterious Little White Bird. I went to an academy near Kingston, Tennessee, that served bicultural Cherokee people. I was fluent in English and fair in Cherokee. In 1811, at 21, I became the U.S. Indian agent for the Cherokees. In the War of 1812, I served as the adjutant of the Cherokee Regiment. After the war, I started a tobacco farm and trading post in Tennessee. It was quite prosperous. I am not proud of it, but I owned about 20 slaves. I became very involved in Cherokee politics. I moved to New Echota, near what is now Calhoun, Georgia, the new capital of the Cherokee Nation. In 1828, I became Principal Chief of the Cherokee Nation. As such, I was the primary negotiator for Cherokee land with governments. I'm going to switch to an older picture of me now. You can now see the lines on my face caused by the worst possible ordeal that happened to Native Americans in U.S. history.
We Cherokees called it Nuna Dal Tsuni, or the Trail Where They Cried. This became the Trail of Tears. It all began about 1800, when white settlers started moving into the southern Appalachian Mountains. It started with men looking for gold or hunting. In 1819, the Love Treaty opened the whole area for white settlement. This was the start of the U.S. government taking possession of 7 million acres of Native American land. About the same time, two significant slave rebellions, Denmark VC's in Charleston in 1822 and Nat Turner's in Virginia in 1831, precipitated a brutal crackdown on blacks throughout the South. Concurrently, the federal government decided to crack down as well on Native Americans by forcibly relocating them. The discovery of gold on Native American land in 1828 in Dahlonega, Georgia, added to the political pressure to remove the Native Americans. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act, designed to move Indians west of the Mississippi. The mission to remove the Indians was given to the U.S. Army, supported by state militias. The blue arrows indicate the trail my people marched. It involves going into villages and ordering the Indians to bundle up what they could carry and move to holding areas to start the journey. Some resisted and were taken in handcuffs. Soldiers searched for others, hiding in caves and woods. These families traveled mostly on foot, some on horses, across some 2,000 miles, stopping at night along the way. Many older people could not keep up. Many starved. Estimates by your historians indicate a total of over 60,000 were relocated. 1 in 4 died, mostly from starvation. My wife, Quaddy, died as we walked through the Arkansas Territory. As Principal Chief of the Cherokees, I was 47 when we reached the Indian Territory. Some referred to me as the Cherokee Moses, but I can assure you, we did not get to the Promised Land. But we endured. On a positive note, we wrote a new constitution for the Cherokee Nation. And thanks to my friend Sequoia, who created our written language using symbols for oral sounds, our nation went from near zero literacy to almost 100% in just a few years. For a more upbeat Cherokee story, let me introduce my friend, Will Thomas.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Chief John Ross. My name is William Holland Thomas. As you can probably tell, I am not Cherokee, but was adopted by them. I was born in 1805, just outside of Waynesville, North Carolina, not far from what would later be called Cashers. At age 13, I started working and living at a trading post and learned to speak Cherokee. I was befriended and later adopted by Yanaguska, principal chief of the Qualla Cherokee. I was called Willusty, or Little Will. In 1819, Chief Yanaguska separated his tribe from the authority of the Cherokee Nation. The Qualla Cherokee then came under the authority of the state of North Carolina. This turned out to be very important for avoiding the Trail of Tears 12 years later. I had read the law, and Yanaguska asked me to become the Cherokee's legal representative. In 1830, at 25, I became the attorney for the Qualla Cherokee. Working at both the state and federal levels, I helped them resist removal and remain on their ancestral lands. Midway through the Trail of Tears, the Qualla Cherokees were pleased that they had not yet suffered the westward removal that Chief Ross and the other Cherokees had faced. But in 1835, the state of North Carolina made it illegal for Native Americans to own land, and the Qualla Cherokees became extremely worried. As a white man and citizen, I could buy land. With my own funds and some provided by the Cherokee, I bought about 640 acres, called the Qualla Boundary. To this day, centered around the town of Cherokee, it is the official land trust home for one of three bands of the Cherokees, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. About 80% of the land is held in federal trust, meaning it can only be sold to other tribal members. In 1839, when I was 34, Chief Yanaguska, on his deathbed, picked me as his successor as principal chief of the Qualla Cherokee. I must add that another Cherokee, named Solonita, was recognized by some to be the successor to Yanaguska. Later, during the Civil War, as a colonel, I commanded Thomas's Legion of Cherokee Indians and Highlanders, with 2 Cherokee companies and 6 white companies. Not many know it, but my men fired the last shot of the war east of the Mississippi at Waynesville on May 6, 1865, not knowing that 27 days earlier, Robert E. Lee had surrendered at Appomattox. I am very proud of my part in preserving the land and culture of these great Cherokees. But now I want to turn it over to the first white settlers of Cashers, starting with Burrock Norton.
Thank you very much, Will. I was born in 1777, a year after our Declaration of Independence. When I was 13, my parents came from North Carolina to Tennessee, South Carolina, just north of the larger town of Walhalla. It may be of interest that the original town was called Valhalla with a V after the Norse warrior resting place. The large influx of Germans pronounced it Valhalla, but because the German W sounds like a V, they spelled it Walhalla. As you know, to this day it is pronounced as it is spelled Walhalla. That is where I married Mary Nicholson, who had the strength and will of a real pioneer woman and who gave me 10 children. Damn, she was a saint. In the early 1800s, I learned from the Cherokees, who came down the mountain for salt, about a beautiful valley under a great mountain called Aunaiku, or White Mountain. It was in 1819 that the Cherokees and the state of North Carolina signed a very important treaty, the Love Treaty. This certainly was not called love for love of Native Americans. By opening up Native American land for white settlers, it took away millions of acres of Cherokee land. The name Love came from Robert Love, who had fought against the Cherokees in the Revolutionary War, was a NC State Senator, and founded the town of Waynesville. A few years after the Love Treaty, I decided to climb to this white mountain from South Carolina and submit a homestead claim. My first trip was with my sons Roderick and Roswell and 2 slaves. It was August 1826. I was 49. We carried a heavy load, including a cutting axe, a broad axe, a buck saw, eggs, 1-2 bushel of parched corn, salt, some fat back, salted pork, coffee, a frying pan, a bucket for making coffee, 2 rifles, and 5 quilts. We left well before daylight, hiked up a trail that followed the Chattooga River, and arrived exhausted at the base of what we would later call Whiteside Cove. We stopped at a Cherokee village called Ocala, which had about 20 wigwams. The chief served us corn mush and venison, all we could eat, maybe the best meal of my life. We continued for a few hours and made our camp. We proceeded to build a house. We cut chestnut trees, cleared some land, and started the frame with chestnut logs. We were good with an axe and saw. No brick or concrete in these parts for many years. The food was abundant. Parched corn, coffee, rabbits, and trout. After a month or so, we all went south to our family farm to bring in the crops. Our next trip north was that fall. The same 5 of us brought door hinges and glass from Walhalla. We rivered the boards and finished the house. After about 2 months, we went south again. Incidentally, I would put my team up against any of your contractors of today. Our next trip, a year later, 1827, included the whole family. We brought supplies, chickens, pigs, seed, iron tools and ammunition, eating and cooking utensils, several mattresses and pillows. We had a wagon for supplies pulled by 2 horses, climbing that mountain trail near the Chattooga River by foot, used for centuries by buffalo, bear, and Indians, but not many wagons. Tested our marriage, if you know what I mean. I surveyed the land, received homestead grants from the state of North Carolina, and began farming 5 miles south of what would be called Cashers in about 10 years. For some reason, it took 27 years for the state of North Carolina to send me the official grants, but you all know how government works. Over the years, my clan multiplied and spread across what was named Cashers in 1839, Highlands in 1875, and across the Continental Divide to what is now called Norton. There were other settlers like Thomas Millsaps in what became Hamburg, later renamed Glenville. At my death at 92 in 1869, I had almost 100 descendants in the greater Cashers area. A few years before I died, my great-grandson interviewed me and put my responses in writing. It was just after the Civil War. I told him I regretted 3 things in my life. 1, it was wrong for one man to hold another man as a slave. I felt that way even before the Civil War. 2, helping with the removal of the Indians. I want to read this part of the interview to get the words right. This is what he wrote. Burrock Norton talked about what he had done to the Indians and said it was wrong. He showed the grandchildren where the stockade stood and how the hungry Indians would eat like animals when they were fed through the small holes. He walked the road and showed them where the soldiers had whipped the ones who lay down and cried because they were leaving home, yoked 2 together like oxen. Here I watched the blood run from one bare back, and I marked a tree to remember each place by. I built this trail of tears, and it started in my front yard, and the tears filled his eyes as he talked. And there are tears in my eyes today. And finally, Fire 3, the Civil War. Even though the fighting did not come to our area, I lost 3 sons, and it divided my family. You can't imagine how horrible that was. Let me now introduce my daughter, Sarah, to give her perspective on those times.
Thanks. Dad, I did have a unique perspective. I was born August 8, 1828, about a year after my family moved to Whiteside Cove. I was the first white child born in the Cashers area. I grew up in the wilderness, a one-room house, with no plumbing, water from a creek 100 yards away, no electricity, a fireplace for a stove and kitchen, no midwife, no post office, no firemen, no police, no schools, no medical help. Just our family with very few friends, watching the Indians getting kicked out of their homes. Can you kids in the audience imagine what it was like growing up here? I was named Sarah Whiteside Norton, after the beautiful mountain we could see from our cabin. By the time I was born, the Indian name for the mountain, Aunaka, English white, became Whiteside. It was a sacred place for the Indians and a special draw for white settlers. During the Civil War, deserters from both the North and the South hid out on top because there are two paths going up providing an escape route if they were discovered. Years later, there was a post office called Grimshaw's on top. You could send a postcard with a picture of the mountain for 1 cent. It was later moved, and you can see it today on Whiteside Cove Road. Back when I was about 10, the family met John Hayward Alley Jr., who was in the Army helping to round up the Cherokees. He then left for the Mexican War. He returned in 1845 when I was 17, and we got married. We built a house in Whiteside Cove. Still standing, it is now called the Lombard Lodge. To say it was a tough life is an understatement. Tough on the men, yes, but we pioneer women had it equally tough. While the men were out hunting, fishing, or looking for gold, who do you think? Who fetched the water from the creek 300 feet down the path? Did the laundry by hand there too? Delivered the babies without a midwife? Raised and homeschooled the kids? Planted the first vegetable gardens? Fed the pigs and chickens? Cooked over an open fire? Kept a backlog on the fire? The men? Not hardly. In addition to being strong, we women were brave as well too. Here is an amazing story my mother told me. Dad was up in the mountains for a few days, hunting and fishing. In the middle of the night, Mom heard a commotion in the yard. It was a bear going after our few pigs. She proceeded outside in her nightgown and bare feet, grabbed an axe and buried it in between the bear's eyes. How brave. She did what she had to do. Any of you modern-day ladies think you could do that? Let me now introduce another early settler who came to this place when I was just 4 years old. Colonel John Zachary.
Hello, and thanks, Sarah. As you know, your dad, Burrock, was a very good friend. We were both born just after the country was founded. Burrock in 1777, myself 1779. We both had a slew of kids, and we both lived long lives. I lived to be 93, Burrock 92. My full name is John Alexander Zachary, but most call me Colonel John. I grew up in Surry County, North Carolina. We had heard about the beautiful mountains of western North Carolina, and that the government was offering homesteads. In 1831, at age 52, I took my son Alexander, or Andy, up to the mountains to scout for some good farming land. We came down the mountain range from Hendersonville and Brevard and discovered this beautiful piece of flat land amidst the mountains. A year later, we brought the whole family, my wife, Sally, our 12 kids, and as many supplies as we could fit on a 6-horse wagon. Many roads were simply Indian footpaths, so we had to do a lot of road repair. We decided to gut our way up the mountains from Pickens, South Carolina, rather than come as I had come southwest along the Blue Ridge Mountains. In January, it was a cold and difficult 200-mile trek, but we made it. This map shows the intersection of two highways. In my day, they were dirt trails. The map shows the town of Cashers, but when we arrived, it was called the Valley because it was a flat area surrounded by large mountains. Wilderness, a lot of trees. No Indian settlements, as this area was primarily a hunting ground for them. Superimposed on the map are various geometric-shaped land grants with the Zachary name. Look at the grants we had over 25 years. My family really owned what you now call Cashers. Also on the map are small numbers, which relate to various buildings that we constructed over several decades. There was a lot of bartering and trading going on between the miners in the mountains and this fledgling farming town. The miners would swap gold dust or nuggets for food, deer skins, or tools. We had a thriving agricultural business, and we traveled to Pickens or Walhalla for mail and supplies. I think you folks today might use the word entrepreneur. That works for me. Here is my first house in 1833. But I have to put that date into historical context. We were starting this town smack in the middle of the Trail of Tears. I have to acknowledge that guilt now, but then I just thought it was a federally mandated program. Got any of those today? 6 years later, 2 of my sons built their own homes nearby. In the spring of 1839, Andy built a house which became the main store in the town. The miners would talk about going down to the valley for supplies. Because they would cash in gold for supplies, they referred to Andy as the Gold Cashier. And they would talk about going down to the Cashier's Valley. In the fall of that same year, 1839, my son Jonathan opened the first post office in his house and applied to be its first postmaster. In his application, he misspelled cashiers as cashers, an easy mistake, but the pronunciation cashers took. It was pronounced and spelled Cashier's Valley for 35 years. In 1875, the spelling of the name of the post office was corrected to Cashier's Valley, but the cashier's pronunciation did not change. In 1881, Valley was dropped. Since then, it has been spelled Cashiers but pronounced Cashers to this day. I am sure some of you still have trouble with this, but please don't blame my boy. In 1834, we constructed a grist mill in town. 11 years later, in 1845, we brought up from Pickens the necessary gears and saws to add a lumber mill to the stream. This allowed our 11th child, Mordecai, an excellent carpenter, in 1848 to build his home out of well-cut lumber, not the axe-hewn timbers we used before. Copying the sophisticated architecture from a book, he built a gorgeous Greek Revival home. No plumbing or electricity, Mordecai's family used candles for light and had a 300-foot walk to fetch water. This very sturdy structure still stands today on the grounds of the Cashiers Historical Society. Come visit. And Wade Hampton III built a hunting lodge just up the road 7 years later. Speaking of Wade Hampton, he was born in this Charleston house in 1818. Still standing today, the original house dates from a century earlier. I show you this to demonstrate that house building expertise existed in our nation for a long time. Just took a while for the tools and materials to get to Cashers. As this town grew, livestock like cattle, pigs, and turkeys would be driven in herds through Cashers to the markets in South Carolina. For the professional drovers, Cashers became a good place to stay overnight. After the drovers came the gentry of South Carolina for hunting and fishing. Thus was started the seasonal visitor business. See how it has blossomed since. In the early Cashers days, there were 2 boarding houses. One was owned by James and Sarah McKinney, who arrived a few years after we did. The house stood in what is today the McKinney Meadow. In about 1845, the McKinneys hosted a distinguished politician you may have heard of by the name of John C. Calhoun. His party had 3 men. 2 slept on a pallet in the guest bedroom. Calhoun got the 1 bed. About midnight, a lone mail rider approached the pitch-black house and wandered in, looking for a place to sleep. He approached Calhoun's bed and said, "Get further there, old horse, and spoon." Calhoun could do nothing but oblige. The other boarding house was Mordecai's. On several occasions around 1850, he hosted Wade Hampton III. I don't think he charged Hampton a fee because Hampton had loaned him money to build the house. Hampton was an avid hunter and fisherman, and 5 years later, he built his own hunting lodge. I'll let him speak to that.
Thank you, Colonel John, for your friendship and for what you have done for this place. Let me give everyone an overview of my life and my fond memories of Cashers Valley. The first Hampton, William, sailed from England in 1619, arrived in Jamestown, Virginia, and joined the fledgling settlers. Over the next 200 years, the Hamptons moved south, developing plantations in South Carolina and Mississippi, and amassing a fortune in cotton and slaves. My grandfather, Wade Hampton I, a general in the Revolutionary War, had a great influence on me, teaching me at an early age how to wield a sword, ride a horse, and shoot a musket. He put me on a horse at age 4. As an adult, I was considered the best rider in the South. I later carried my grandfather's sword in the Civil War when the musket had been replaced by the rifle. My father, Wade Hampton II, was a colonel in the War of 1812. He married my mother, Anne Fitzsimons, in 1817, and I was born in 1818 in my grandmother's Charleston house, the Rhett Fitzsimons house, still standing. My father was a very respected leader in South Carolina, and in 1825 became a member of the state senate. Most folks think the famous Hampton Park in Charleston was named after me, but it was my dad. I learned 2 great leadership lessons from him: how to address a large audience on political/social issues of the day, and how to treat servants and slaves with kindness. To that last point, our newspaper published this in his obituary. I'll read it. His humane and considerate treatment of his poor dependents, its such beautiful harmony with his care for their immortal interests, held up a pattern to imitation. If this patriarchal relationship of master to servants were more often given to the world, how differently would be looked upon this much maligned institution of our southern states. I was raised in Columbia, South Carolina, and attended Rice Creek Academy, then South Carolina College, now South Carolina University. I graduated in 1836 when I was 18. I read, but did not practice the law. I felt I was too much of an outdoorsman, and I had a lot of plantations to run. Our first trip to Cashers Valley was in 1845, when I was 27. My dad, my brother Kit, and I bought a 2,300-acre tract from the Zacharys, on which we would later build a hunting lodge and various cottages for family members. I was an avid hunter and fisherman. I read a story written about me killing a bear with just a knife. Truth be told, the bear was tied up in a bear pen. Not the same, I don't think, but south of Whiteside Mountain, there is a mountain called Bear Pen. Another story that is very true: several of us climbed over the mountains to what you now call Glenville. We found streams overflowing with brook trout, also called Arctic char, a species originating in the Arctic that had not been pushed over the Appalachian Mountains during the Ice Age and did not exist to the east of the Continental Divide. We used watertight bags or baskets to transport the fish to cachers and stock the streams at the Chattooga headwaters. Any of you fishermen in the audience today can thank us for this effort. Our summer trips to cachers lasted for many years. I recall in 1878, at 60, going to Walhalla by train and then up the mountains by carriage. Let me jump to my picture in uniform.
As war approached, like my dad, I was also not in favor of secession. But when South Carolina seceded, I felt that honor and patriotism required me to stand by my state, right or wrong. A friend described in a letter this very ambivalent position many of us felt as follows: "Neither of my sons would fight for the sake of slavery. They hate slavery." Someone asked, "What are they fighting for?" "For Southern rights, whatever that is." I feel I should speak to you folks about slavery. First of all, I was one of the largest slave owners in the South. I won't deny it. But I will tell you I was a good master of the plantation. I say that because I was not like many slave owners throughout the South who beat, raped, and tortured slaves, and the worst, broke up slave families as punishment. Certainly not to brag, but to make my point that I was a good master as a plantation owner. I brought in preachers to read the catechism to my slaves. This was necessary because the 1740 Negro Act had made it illegal for slaves to read. In addition, I also made a point to give Christmas presents to all, even on hard times. Later in life, while running for governor, I got this letter. "Seeing you are nominated for governor by the white people, and hearing you have promised the black man all the rights he now has, and knowing you're a good and kind man who will do what he promises, I will vote for you, and will get all the black men I can to do the same. Signed, your friend and former slave." In the context of my own day, I viewed myself as a good master. But now, seeing my life through the prism of your times, I realize that my benevolence cannot excuse the evil of owning other human beings. Back to the war. I was asked to form a legion of cavalry. I recruited, trained, and financed the Hampton Legion. It included students from my alma mater, South Carolina College, and a company of cadets from the South Carolina Military Academy, later named the Citadel. I progressed from colonel to lieutenant general, and in command of Robert E. Lee's cavalry. We fought at Manassas, Gettysburg, Richmond, and across South Carolina. I believe I was the only general on either side who did not have military training. But being an outstanding horseman was critical for success, and I could handle any horse, even in battle. I truly believe I was a good general primarily because I led from the front. The war did not touch Cashers, but its impact did. Because of disagreements over the war, my friend John Zachary would not allow some of his Union sympathizer sons to be buried in the family cemetery. That is why there are 2 Zachary cemeteries today on the hills above what is now called High Hampton. Because there were no plantations in Cashers, there were just a few enslaved people for house and garden chores. After the war, the blacks in Cashers, just like freed blacks throughout the South, had no money and returned down the mountain. Unfortunately, the Freedmen Bureau's promise of 40 acres and a mule was not honored, and the few black people never returned to Cashers. As a result, Cashers became, and has remained, a mostly white town. Some of you in the audience may not be aware of the following semantics preference. The 1840 census in Cashers listed 58 people by name, plus 3 slaves without names. In my day, this would not be strange, but I can understand in current-day America how offensive it is to refer to whites as people, but blacks as slaves. It implies slaves are not people. That is why, today in America, people refer to slaves as enslaved people, because that term recognizes that slaves were indeed people. It acknowledges their humanity, and I agree with that. The issue of race is central to the American story. It certainly was in my time. And now, 160 years after the Civil War, it remains central to yours. Today, the disparity between blacks and whites in housing, wealth, education, healthcare, and opportunity is the enduring stain of slavery. Now, back to the Civil War. It was a gruesome war. I was wounded 5 times, and my brother Frank was killed. But my deepest grief occurred when my son Preston was killed, and his older brother Wade IV, trying to save him, was badly wounded. I got to that site within a few minutes of the action. Crying, I held Preston in my arms. After Wade IV was sent home to recuperate, I sent word that no other son of mine will serve under my command. The death toll on the entire country was horrible. 360,000 Union and 260,000 Confederate soldiers killed in brutal fighting. And the devastation to the land and economy of the South is hard to describe. This was partly due to the fact that most of the fighting was on Southern soil, but also the war shattered the Southern economy. On a personal level, I went from being one of the richest men in South Carolina to bankruptcy. To understand exactly how that happened, I want to show you this demographic chart, which shows massive population shifts over a 105-year period. In my state of South Carolina over a century, the racial composition changed radically. The Native American population in red decreased dramatically from 10,000 to 300 as they were pushed to the mountains. The white population increased 100-fold in blue, largely due in part to our ancestors coming south on what was called the Wagon Trail. And the black population, the vast majority being slaves, increased an amazing 1,000-fold. That huge slave population became the wealth of the planting gentry. My guess is you folks in the audience have your family wealth in stocks, bonds, real estate, and other investments. My assets were largely my slaves. Each one had a dollar value. When slavery was abolished, overnight, my total net worth went to zero. And my very profitable large plantations lost the main reason they were so profitable: a workforce that cost me almost nothing. Even worse hit were the hundreds of thousands of blacks who, even though they were exceedingly happy to be free, owned no land, no houses, no jobs except sharecropping, zero money in the bank, and precious little cash under their straw mattresses. Please understand me clearly. I'm not saying that slavery shouldn't have been abolished. I'm only stating that the war devastated a lot of people and shattered the economy of the South. Now comes Reconstruction.
We then entered a period called Reconstruction, which was as difficult as the war. I wrote in a letter to a friend, "The war was full of sorrows and grief to me, but peace is worse. I often wish I had fallen when our flag was waving in triumph." The Reconstruction Act of 1867 divided the South into military districts, called for an army of occupation, new voter registration, and new constitutions. No person engaged in rebellion could hold office, which eliminated most white men. The State Constitutional Convention in Charleston in January 1868 was composed of 73 Negroes and 51 white men. Most of the white men were from the North, and most of the blacks were illiterate, which is totally understandable, because the 1740 Negro Act, following the Stono Rebellion, had made it illegal for slaves to learn how to read. This frayed government got the state back into the Union, but accomplished little else for 9 years. It also spawned white backlash in the form of red shirts and the KKK, which illegally restricted black voting with violence and all kinds of gimmicks. After some arm twisting, I ran for governor in 1876 on the Democratic ticket. There has been some controversy over the KKK supporting me, and it is true. They supported the Democratic ticket because the alternative was the Republican, largely black party. But my campaign appeal was to whites and blacks, with a theme of unity that I hope mirrored Lincoln's second inaugural address. I absolutely refused to join the KKK. But as governor for 3 years until 1879, I have to confess, I did not adequately fight against the extensive voter suppression of blacks. In 1879, I joined the U.S. Senate, representing the state of South Carolina. For 12 years, I made quite a name for myself working across the aisle. Looking at today's Congress, I don't see much of that.
In 1902, on my deathbed, my mind wandered back to a rain-soaked battlefield in Virginia when Preston was killed and Wade IV wounded. I whispered, "My children, heroes forever." Then I spoke my final words, "God bless all my people, black and white." What happened to our family estate in Cashers?
Dr. William Halstead, a prominent surgeon at Johns Hopkins, married his chief nurse, my niece Carolyn. After honeymooning at my estate, he purchased it from my daughters, expanded it and called it High Hampton, after his family's estate in Scotland, High Halstead.
Purchased in 1922 by the McKee family, High Hampton grew to become what it is today, the cornerstone of the Cashers area, a beautiful club, golf course, resort. It makes me proud to have my name on it, not to mention a nationally ranked golf course a mile down the road. Bob, what a legacy.
Thank you, General, and thanks to all of you from yesteryear who have participated so willingly. Thanks in particular to the first inhabitants of this place, the Cherokees, and especially Chief Ostanaqua. Also to the first home builder in this place, Barack Norton.
My pleasure, Bob.
Also to the first land developer, Colonel John Zachary.
Honored to do it.
And thanks especially to our first seasonal visitor, Wade Hampton III.
Thank you, Colonel.
I'm hopeful that this has informed residents of Caches and others of what it was like to live here 200 years ago, and also of some major historical trends that have come through the country over the time, that swept across the nation. Slavery, the Civil War, Reconstruction, and the horrible Trail of Tears where the Indians were sent out west. Hopefully you got a sense of what those things were all about. Bob Carroll, signing off.